Next time, tell us a story about it.
Hold on. I would ask them, tell me the name of the man who stood a giant amongst men, with shoulders as broad as an ox, the strength of 10 berserkers, and a temper to match. And the cups would go down on the boards, and the cries would go out around the hall, and the name would echo, Grettir, Grettir the strong, Grettir, son of Asmund. And when the cries had died down, I would ask of them, tell me the name of a man who lived as an outlaw, a thief and a grave robber, who made enemies of kings, who was abandoned by the gods and cursed with ill luck unto his death. And now there was naught but silence. Tell me his name. And eventually someone would utter it. You speak of Grettir, son of Asmund. My tale involves Grettir. Perhaps you will listen to it, and perhaps at the end you will not think so unkindly of the son of Asmund. It begins in Thorolstadt, a small hamlet in a shady vale just down from Vanstall. Thorol owned it, son of Grim, son of Thorol, son of Friedmund, who originally settled there. Not a chieftain, but a kind and generous man, a man of fair wealth, a man with a wife and 2 children, and wanted for not much at all in the world, save for one thing, to be rid of the ghost that haunted his lands, that drove off his shepherds. And so, at a loss for what to do, he went to the Alding, to the booth of the lawman Skapti, who was a man known for his knowledge and good counsel, and said to him, my lands are haunted. No shepherd will take the job of tending the flocks for fear that they'll be harassed and harried, and eventually they will run off in fear. And Skapti smiled and said, I wish that all the problems that were brought before me in my booth were as easy to solve as yours. If it's a shepherd you need, then I can supply you with one. His name is Glam. He came from Silgsdale in Sweden last year. He is a big, strong man, but not to everyone's liking, for when he is angered he can be rather cross-grained. But he will not be put to fright by ghosts. I will send him to you. And so, as the Alding drew to a close, a tall man approached Thorol. He had grey eyes and wolf-grey hair that came down to his shoulders, and when he spoke, it was with a stern voice. Skapti has sent me to you. He says that you have work that others fear to take. And Thorol explained to them that he was in need of a shepherd. Glam was a bit confused. What troubles can you have tending to a flock of sheep? And Thorol explained that his lands were haunted. Glam wasn't bothered. In fact, he thought it would make the work less dull. And both agreed that there was naught but to face up to the ghost, and it was best faced with a brave face. And so Glam went back with him to Thorolstadt and began work as a shepherd. Thorol treated him kindly and with the same favour as he did all his workers, but most of the people in Thorolstadt didn't like Glam. He was moody, he moaned, he was irritable, and for many of them the worst thing of all was he seemed to have no religion. The new church had set up in Thorolstadt, and Glam abstained from mass and never went to church, and most of the people, safe to say, hated him. But he was good at his work. When he shouted, the sheep did what he told them to do. And so it came to the Yule Eve, and Glam got up in the morning and called for his breakfast. And Gunhild, Thorol's wife, said to him, It is not right and proper that you should eat on the eve of the Yule day, for it is the duty of all good Christian men to fast. And Glam, do not see that much good comes from all this religion of yours. I think men were best off when they were heathen. I want my food, not foolery. Bring it to me now. Good Joseph. I think that it will go ill for you if you commit this sin, although, had to be said, she said it quietly so Glam didn't hear her, for she knew that if she didn't feed him it would go badly for her. And so she fed him, and Glam went out to tend the flocks. That day the storms came in, driving rain that turned to snow, howling winds. The land got dark, and all through the day they could still hear Glam out in the fields shouting at the sheep. But when it came to Mass, he had not returned. And the following morning there was still no sign of him. And Thorol persuaded the men of Thorolstadt to go out and search for him. And they set parties up, and they went in all directions, to the north and the south, the east and the west. And eventually 4 of them came across a scene of utter devastation. The ground was churned up as if 2 trolls had been fighting. Patches of blood stained the snow. They followed the trail of destruction up to a small rise, down the other side, and there a body, black as hell and swollen to the size of an ox, Glam, dead. Around him more signs of carnage, a fight. The men looked around. Footprints heading off into the hills, trail of blood. Glam must have fought the ghost, said one of them. And driven him off, said another. He was an irritable man, but he has done us a favour. We should take him body back to the church, and we should bury him and give him a good Christian burial. But when they tried to move Glam's body, they couldn't budge it. No matter how hard they tried, all 4 of them pulling, it just would not move. So they went back to Thorolstadt, told Thorol what had happened, took 2 oxen and went back to his body. And still, they couldn't move him. Nothing on earth was going to move Glam's body from the spot where he had fallen. We shall go and get the priest. If we cannot take him to the church, we can bring the priest to him. And that's what they did. But with the priest with them, they searched high and low, and men that had lived in the lands their entire life became lost, disorientated, and they couldn't find the body until the priest just threw his arms up in despair and said, "That's it, I'm going back home." And of course, as soon as he'd gone, they came across the body. There was nothing they could do. They collected some stones and buried him under a cairn and left him there. It was not long before people realised that Glam did not rest easily in his grave. People said they'd seen him around the houses, riding across the rooftops. Someone was attacked. One man was knocked senseless and lost his wits. And people began to flee Thorolstadt, leaving the area behind, as Glam went on a rampage. Thorol despaired. He got rid of one ghost, only to get another one that seemed even worse. But as winter waned and spring bloomed, Glam's hauntings began to cease until he was not seen again. People began to come back to the area. Thorol even got himself another shepherd. Thorgert, a man who was travelling and being without work, was looking for money. Thorol, ever a kind man, did warn him about Glam and the ghost, and his fears, his secret fears that the ghost would one day return. Thorgert shrugged it off. I'm not to be put to fear by ghosts. And he took the job, and life in Thorolstadt returned to normal until winter. As winter came, Glam appeared again. At first, he seemed content to make noise rather than trouble. He would be heard, he would be seen. People began nervous, apart from Thorgat, who thought it rather amusing. He will have to come a lot closer if he's going to frighten me, he would say as they sat around the hearth fire, and people counselled him to silence. Nonsense. The spirit has gone out of you, said Thorgat. I have heard the crash of the shield wall. I will not fall dead in the twilight for sounds of pattering feet on rooftops. And then the Yule Eve came round again. A storm as worse as the one the year before. Thorgat went out to tend the sheep, and when they went to mass, he had not come back. Thorol tried to encourage the villagers to go out and look for them, but they didn't want to risk themselves into the power of trolls in the night. And so it wasn't until the morning of the Yule day that once again they went in search of a lost shepherd. They went to where the clan was buried, and there they found him. Thorgat dead, his neck broken, every bone in his body torn out. They took him back to the church. They buried him. And Glam's rampages continued, worse than the year before. A cowherd had his back broken. Thorol's daughter was attacked. One by one, everyone fled, until all that remained in Thorolstadt was Thorol. It was at this time that Grettir was visiting his mother's brother in Tunga, a farmstead not far from Banstow, not far from Thorolstadt, and all the talk there was of Glam's walking. Some people said that Glam had now ventured up the valley, and if anyone took a horse or a dog there, they would surely lose it. Some people said that he'd attacked and killed as many as 7 people. Some said it was more, some said it was less. And as Grettir sat with his uncle Jokul and talked, he said, I have a mind to go to Thorolstadt. Why? Said his uncle. To see this ghost, of course. Jokul counselled against it. Not much good will come if you start dealing with ghosts and trolls. But Grettir, once his mind was set, was stubborn, and so he took a horse and he rode out to Thorolstadt, where Thorol, surprised to have a visitor for once, met him, apologising for the state his hearth was in. I'm here for sight of a ghost, not hospitality, said Grettir. I wish to stay, and I wish to see this Glam with my own eyes, see if all these stories are true. Thorol counselled against it as well. If nothing else, he said, even if you escape unharmed, Glam will surely come and take your horse and kill it. Grettir wasn't bothered. There are plenty more horses I can buy. And so he stayed the night. And for the first time in many days, there was no creaking on rooftops, there was no shuffling of feet round houses, nothing at all. Glam failed to appear, and even when they went to the stables, Grettir's horse was still there, alive, untouched. Thorol said to Grettir, your staying here seems to have done some good, but I fear if you stay another night it will not go well. I am staying, said Grettir. And he stayed a second night. Again, no sounds, no sight or sound of Glam whatsoever, but this time, when they went to the stable in the morning, they found the doors wide open and Grettir's horse lying outside, with the bone in its body broken. You should leave. For the death of my horse I will have sight of this thrall, said Grettir. I will stay another night, and this time we will see if Glam comes for me. That night, Greta settled down. He had a huge cloak that he wore, and he pulled it up over himself, just so he could see out of the neck hole, and he fastened his feet against the bench so that the cloak was held tight, and pulled it up over his head. And he waited. An hour went by, and then another, and a third. Nothing. And then a creak, a thud, sound of something moving on the rooftops. Dust and tiny insects fell out of the thatch from above. Something moved around, kicking its heels. The sound moved down the rooftops, and then a crunch as something landed in the snow, and then the door opened, and in stretched a creature as something he'd never seen before, reaching in, having to bend in, such was its size, smelling abominably, a putrid looking head. Glam had arrived. He stood up, stretching, his hands going up, leaning on the rafters, seeming to grow as he did so. Sniffed, looked around. He saw in the corner where Greta was sat, the cloak drawn above him, and wondered what was beneath. He reached forward, rotten nails, long fingers, grabbing the cloak, and tugged. And Greta the strong, held firm. Glam pulled again, a firmer tug this time, and Greta still held fast. A third attempt there, this time with both hands, firm tug, a real good yank. And Greta's strength still held, but the cloak didn't. It tore in two, and as it did so, Glam tottered backwards, back across the hall, and Greta chose his time to strike, leaping forward, tackling Glam round the waist, trying to bring him to the ground. Glam rained blow after blow upon him. Greta responded in kind. Strikes that would have felled mountains, knocked down trees. They raged around the hall, knocking tables and chairs and stools asunder. They went through the hearth, kicking at the fire and the wood in all directions, and neither of them noticed any of this. Such was their intent, fighting each other, battling, trying to bring the other down. And then Greta chose his moment. One last push. He launched himself with all the last of his strength, taking Glam, pushing him down. Glam fell. His shoulder struck the lintel of the door, his head hit the roof, bringing down the rafters and the frozen thatch. And then they were outside, rolling over in the snow, until eventually they came to a stop. Glam on his back, Greta now to stride him. He drew his sax from his belt, held it aloft, was ready to strike. And the gods abandoned him. The clouds rolled back, and the moonlight shone down upon them, and the moonlight reflected in Glam's eyes. And for the first time in his life, Greta knew fear. His body froze. He couldn't act, he couldn't speak, he couldn't bring the knife down into Glam's neck. And then Glam spoke. Hear me, Greta, son of Asmund. This I lay upon you. The strength which is yours is not mine to take, but I can decree that from this day forward you shall not grow any more stronger than you are already. Hitherto your deeds have brought you fame, but henceforward there will fall upon you nothing but exile and battle. Your guardian spirit will forsake you, and your deeds will turn to evil. You will be forced into exile to ever live your life alone, and that loneliness will drive you to your death. And the clouds covered up the moon, and Greta felt his strength coming back, and with one mighty blow he struck Glam's head off. Thorol had seen it all. He came out praising the old gods and the new. But Glamour's threat was ended, and they took the body and the head and they burnt it until it was cold cinders, and then they wrapped it in a skin and they took it somewhere far from the lands of men and buried it. And Thorol and Grettir parted in friendship. Thorol gave him what money he had to buy new clothes, a new horse, and thanked him more than he thanked anyone in his life for ridding him of Glamour's ghost. Everything that Glam said came to pass. Grettir may have been able to defeat the ghost, but he was unable to defeat his words. He died alone in exile. But they say crops die, cattle die, kinsmen die, but word fame lasts forever. And no matter what his deeds were, no matter what people thought of them, Grettir's deeds have lasted for a long time. But to the people of Thorolstadt, and they did return, there was never anyone as brave, as courageous, as honourable as Grettir, son of Asmund.
Oh, wow. Would you like to tell us where that comes from? Not everyone will know.
Yeah, one of the Icelandic sagas, chapters 33 to 35, I think. You can tell how long they were.